the interim report was published a few weeks ago, and the review team are now consulting on it again, so this is your opportunity to feed into it. And we've got the perfect panel for you today, with Sir Hugh Taylor, the chair of the review, and a distinguished set of representatives from charities, industry, and the patient voice for you to hear today. I'm particularly pleased to be involved because the Wellcome Trust is supporting the review, both with in-kind support and financial support, because the issues are so important to us. Like so many of the charities here today, we fund research that we want to get to the patient as quickly as possible, and it's hugely frustrating for us when barriers and blocks in the system and the NHS mean a rapid test for chlamydia or a new sort of gastric banding surgery takes longer to get to the patient than we would want it to. So these are really important issues. This is our opportunity to hear more about them today. I'm going to introduce Sir Hugh Taylor first as chair of the review to give you the overview of it and tell you the current thinking, and then after that I'll introduce the rest of the panel to give their perspectives. Over to you, Sir Hugh.
Thank you ever so much. It's great to be here, and I think the first thing I just want to say about the review is that we were overwhelmed actually with the support and engagement that we've received from a huge variety of stakeholders in the early part of the review. And the association, your association, has been very much at the heart of that and provided us with some excellent material and organised a round table and has been a very active player. So we're very, very grateful. And if you look into our report, you'll see the very, very high level of engagement which we've had, over 600 stakeholders participating in it, and a huge amount of material actually for us to crunch down. We've now published an interim report. It's deliberately high level, but effectively it sets a framework for the next stage of our work, which is to take where we've got to and get down to the next level of detail. I've worked in and around government for most of my life and now in the NHS, and I think one problem sometimes associated with reviews like this is they stay at high level, and I think really if you're going to get anywhere with these things, you need to get down at least to the next 2 or 3 levels of detail so that we can have some confidence that the system can really put them into action. At the heart of the review is this dilemma that we stand at probably the most exciting moment in recent times, a most exciting era for innovation in almost all health technologies. The medicine pipeline is showing real signs of life for the first time in a long time. The med tech, the devices and digital industries are all very, very vibrant. And the question at the heart of the review, as I say, is how we can capitalize on all that wonderful development at the same time as we, like all health economies across the world, are really stretched in terms of resources. Now, I'm an unreconstituted believer in the principle of better quality care, whether it's better medicines, whether it's better management of care pathways, whether it's new ways of providing care through digital systems and so on. I'm a great believer that when you do things like that, that leads to better care and more productive care. But as we'll say in a moment, we've got to think very hard about how we deliver that. So the interim report sets out 5 key propositions. And the first one is, which are the frame really for the report. And the first is, and obviously I don't need to preach this particular proposition to this audience, that patients should be given a stronger voice at every stage of the innovation pathway. Now, Hilary Newiss from Patient Voices will say a little bit more about this in a moment. She's one of the champions on this review, along with Stuart, Dollow and some others. And it is absolutely a centrally held tenet of the review that we need to get this right. We need to get it right because we need to direct innovation towards outcomes that matter most to patients, to give further impetus to earlier trials and pilots of new products, not least drawing on the fact that your association and others have been very keen to emphasise to us that patient appetite for risk is often higher, we're told, than is allowed for in some approaches to research. And we need that voice to be taken more explicitly into account all the way through the research pathway. And we need the patient pull to encourage and incentivise new technologies and models of care to be introduced throughout the system. As I say, Hilary will say a bit more about this at the moment, and I'll just touch on it again when I mention our fifth proposition. We then have three propositions which really go to the, if you like, to the process heart of this. One is that we do think we need a radically new approach to accelerate and manage entry into our health system of emerging products which promise the most significant and potentially transformative impact in terms of patient benefit and overall value. And what we really mean by this is we need to find a way to ensure that all those engaged in the regulatory and purchasing and commissioning of the most promising new products get into discussion at the earliest possible stage with the innovators concerned and develop bespoke packages which ensure that, which really help them to manage access of that product through to patients, through the trials process, through the regulation process, as quickly as possible. And there are lots of strands of work associated with this. They're set out in the interim report. It's building actually on a lot of already promising developments. But what we really need to do is bring all that together. And one of the most complex pieces of work we've got to do there is to think about how we can develop new packages of reimbursement for products, particularly when they're in this conditional phase of licensing. And there's a lot of enthusiasm, I think, from industry as well as from regulators and the NHS to think hard about that. And I'm really encouraged that we might make real progress on that area. So that's the second key proposition, and there's a lot of detail underneath that, and we'll continue to work on it. The third proposition is that we need to support all innovators across the system. One of the things we keep emphasising is that you can't possibly nationalise all innovation. I can't think of anything worse to do with innovation than to try and press it all through some national pipeline. I sometimes think that some of our innovators would like that, really. They just like all innovation to be mandated from the centre, somebody to pull a lever and it all to happen magically. Well, I just don't think it would work like that. But I think what we think we lack at the moment is a really vibrant marketplace, exchange place, particularly at regional and local levels, where patients can get engaged with innovators, where innovators can come to talk to patients, and where we can take up and implement and exchange ideas in a more vibrant way. And alongside that, and Stuart will talk a bit about this, we think we can provide more help for all innovators in managing through the pathway, what George talks about as the lit runway. The fourth proposition, and the third of the sort of process changes we're looking at, is what we've described as galvanizing the NHS. This is how we ensure that when new products are coming onto the market, are approved, that the NHS is quick on the uptake rather than is sometimes alleged, and is sometimes the case, slow on the uptake. And we've got some thoughts on this. Obviously, I work in the NHS quite a bit of the time at the moment as chair of Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital, and I have my own thoughts on this. But what we think we need to do is work with NHS England and with NHS Improvement, using the new models of care which they're working on, to both stimulate and potentially incentivise change. And we think that needs to come in 2 or 3 forms, in part through using the systems like the AHSNs and others to support people who want to deliver change. And quite often we think, and we've been told, I should say, that the biggest obstacle to change is not the introduction of a new device or a new digital proposition, but the change process that needs to go into making it happen. all the discussions which need to be had across the primary and secondary care pathway, the detailed work that needs to be done to implement change. And in a system which is already strained, with GPs absolutely strained, under stress, and secondary care systems under stress, it's quite often difficult to find time to make these things happen. So we think we need a bit of investment in the change management process. Similarly, we think that some of the bigger leading organisations, the AHSCs and others, places like my own, should take being incentivised and encouraged to take a more active part in leading and accounting for innovation across referral pathways through the accountable care organisation model. We also think there's a case for refocusing local drugs and therapeutics committees to ensure in particular that they're not there second-guessing decisions which have been taken elsewhere in the system, but they focus on medicines optimisation and other technologies optimisation, and by that I mean making sure that local systems are implementing new products. And second, and perhaps just as important, again with patient support, that data is used to support the decommissioning of superseded or ineffective products. And then the fifth proposition is that we, and this is rather classic bureaucratic wording, we need a new system architecture. I hardly can spit the words out, but the emphasis here is that what we don't think we need is more new bodies to implement any of all this kind of thing, but we do think we want the system as it is to work more effectively. And we're really proposing that that should happen by further development of the academic health science networks at regional and local level, and we think that might need a bit more systematization in the way the system works there. And second, a complementary innovation partnership at national level, where national bodies involved in the innovation pathway commit themselves to work closely and hold themselves together, possibly through hold themselves to account, possibly through a concordat and possibly some form of committee independently chaired. All that to be worked through. So around those 5 propositions, we'll be doing a lot more detailed work now. And we will want further engagement with organisations like the AMRC, both in terms of commenting on what we've said already, exemplifying some of these propositions, and sounding out the detailed recommendations. Thank you.
I'm now going to turn to the panel to give some quick reactions and responses to that, starting with our 2 workstream champions. First of all, Hilary Newiss from National Voices, who's championing the patient perspective, and then Stuart Dollow from Vermilion Life Sciences. We'll then follow on with Ginny Acha from ABPI and Eric Lowe from Myeloma UK. I won't give you any more biographies of any of them, it's all in your pack. So without further ado, over to the panel.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me here. We have already had, as Hugh said, a really good workshop with members of AMRC, and along with the representing that patient voice and along with all the other stakeholders, everybody has backed the idea of empowering patients and putting patients centre stage. So I was really pleased to see that as the first proposition coming out of the review. What we think, taking that on, what does that mean in a little bit more detail? There are 3 areas that we think are standalone outcomes for patients at the centre of the review. The first is trying to put outcome measures that matter to patients. That's not just patient-reported outcome measures, but actually societal impact, the measures that actually are important or what patients actually need for their particular long-term condition or condition. So that's one thing that we really like to see if we can deliver. The second point that came out from everybody is that more transparency in the system would be very useful, particularly if certain drugs are not approved or not reimbursed, why they're not, So a little bit more transparency in how these decisions are made and what is available. And I think that goes with talking about risk and affordability and having that grown-up conversation, actually what is affordable and why it's not available. And the third outcome that we are looking at is doing a principles called I statements. I'm chair of National Voices. Many of you will know it's a system that we have pioneered, which defines what the system should look like from a patient or the public's point of view. So we're going to, and we've already started with your help at some workshops, and we're going to refine those over the next couple of months. There won't be that many, but it'll just look around the things that we would like as patients, such as drugs that work or complete transparency in the trials, transparency of data, safety, joint decision making with clinicians. They're all the things that we have campaigned together for a while. So we're going to hone those, and we'll need your help again later on to finalise those. So how are we going to try and deliver this? Coming back to the outcomes measure, as Hugh has said, there's one of the ideas is to have this early partnership discussion, and we very much want patients to be part of that, to define at the beginning what the outcomes would look like, and those can then feed further down the regulatory pathway down to NICE, so we're not having a re-conversation. And industry are quite keen on this too, because it means that they don't get to NICE and then say, oh, well, you know, what are your patient outcomes, and have to go back. So they have that early conversation. Many of you do that already with your own charities, and we've got some really good examples of defining patient need and where the research should go and what the outcomes are you want. And those have been great examples for us to use and build on. But there's how we do that more systematically, and how we contact people and engage with the right patients for the right entrepreneurs. I think there's some further work to be done, and I very much look forward to your suggestions on how we actually do that. Also, the other way is a lot of entrepreneurs, particularly in digital, don't know how to access patients. So there's a sort of partnership gateway opportunity for us here as patient organisations to help access patients. Also, many don't really know how to do good patient engagement. So we're looking at whether there's some work that we can build on organisations who know how to do this very well, to share some practice and learning. And again, if you've got some good examples or materials on that, we'd be interested in seeing those. Transparency I've already spoken about. The last point where I think patients can feed into this is the point that Hugh made about uptake at the end of the line. How does a patient know what there is available? And really, we're calling this patient pull, but you know, there are great examples of patient-driven changes in public health, and it is a power that we have to help the NHS actually change in the way it does things. So we're looking at a couple of things like good patient information, but how do we get that information to the individual patient? And I think there's a great opportunity for the charities to help with that. And again, localism, to make sure there's a strong patient voice in the decision-making schemes, decision-making organisations. A lot of people need support in how to get their voice over effectively, and we can help there as well. So I've given some examples of where I think patient voice and patient involvement in the Accelerated Access Review is going to be embedded, but I'd certainly like your further views. And I've left out why this is so important, because I know one of my fellow panel members will be talking about that later. But I think this is a great opportunity for us to really make a transformation in how care is delivered. Thank you.
Thanks, Hilary, Hugh and Nicola, and thank you to AMRC for the opportunity to come and allow us to talk about not only our reflections but also our ambitions. As a clinician, which is how I trained, my first thought is often about patient impact. But often I recognise that clinicians think about patient impact at a medical level rather than necessarily a patient experience level. And often that talks about standard measures of cures rather than the patient experience, so I very much echo what Hilary's been saying. But also as someone who is a pharmaceutical physician, having worked in the industry for many years, often my colleagues and mine thoughts have been about the innovation itself, and often to the regulatory need and increasingly to the reimbursement or the health technology appraisal need. But again, reflecting that not necessarily either of those represent the patient experience. And I think they are shifting, but there is more that can be done. But also, if I reflect on the industry perspective or the pharmaceutical physician perspective, the interest about the basic science, the interest about recognising the need for an increasing number of targets, projects, and researchers as well, because it increases the richness of the number of people who are able to play and make a big difference in medical research. So the big opportunity, I think, for the review itself is its focus on this iterative approach, which includes patients as a very big part of it, but also on the need to stimulate researchers in every walk of medical research of all sizes. And the ability to have people involved throughout a development journey is a great opportunity, because traditionally different innovators, patient experience has been asked for and interpreted rather than necessarily being involved and shaping. And I think the ability to involve and shape is something which gives us a big opportunity and distinguish us as a country and also as an innovative experience. But through the mechanics and the process that Hugh talked about, I believe that it's only with greater partnership early on in development processes that we will have the ability to develop and uptake innovations, not only because of their medical impact, but also because of their patient relevance. And recognising that those two things are often complementary, but they are also necessarily a tension, because some of the patient-relevant measures are not necessarily reflected in historical disease measures. And recognising how we manage that tension to give us a guideline for how to develop innovations that have the maximum benefit in the broader medical and social sense, I think is one of the real opportunities. And then once we articulate what they are in terms of the promise of any innovation, the ability to use that as a roadmap to speed up the innovation with clear input and guidance to innovators to allow them to get their project available to be evaluated in a more iterative way. But also to recognise when they're working on a project that may be futile. So I've described this as being able to file fast in a regulatory sense, but also being able to fail fast and move on to something that's more beneficial. Because false hope is also something we need to be able to get out of the system. So the question, I think, in my mind is how we foster innovation in as many quarters as possible and assist innovators of all shape and size and of all locations to manage their development planning by thinking about what the future aspect might look like. Start with the end in mind is the old parlance, but not only about the end in a traditional regulatory endpoint, but it's actually in terms of a patient benefit risk endpoint, which reflects the diversity of the people who are involved in any of those innovations and the disease states. And building a shared objective in that, I think, gives us an opportunity to create a centre of gravity for innovators, be they global innovators to come and work in the UK, but ensuring that the data that we generate has global relevance, but also local innovators to assist them in terms of the work that they can do to pilot and accelerate the innovations that they have. Because I firmly believe that innovations that aren't designed and developed in the correct way don't deliver what's required, so they're not useful. Innovations that don't measure the right things aren't sufficiently valued, and that value isn't exemplified. And innovations that don't have the right data aren't effective, and they may not be worth investigating. And I very much like the conversation we heard this morning from Helena about how smart data use and real-world data can actually provide a system architecture for that. I really firmly believe that's a great potential. But in the same way, with all of those development aspects, innovations that aren't used may as well not be there. So they are a waste of resource, money and time. So we need to make sure that the pathway actually adopts the innovation pathway to actually have it taken up. So sharing information early allows us to have a better understanding. And I think the ability through innovation partnerships allows us to align the key players so that they are allowed to regulate appropriately to protect all of us as patients. They are there to facilitate the acceleration of development and uptake, but also understand the obligations that they have in getting into that partnership, that medicines will continue to be evaluated. So I believe the opportunity here is that we can get the right innovations evaluated and taken up because of the right evidence that we've generated at the right value and then using them at the right time. Thank you.
So good morning again. I'm Jenny Acha from ABPI, and I'm very grateful to the AMRC and to the panel for allowing us to give us some views on the AR from the industry side. Now, obviously, as the minister mentioned at several points, medicines aren't the only option for the AR, but it is an important part of how things have been progressing in discussions with AR, and we're grateful to all of the team at the Accelerated Access Review for working so closely with us to help get our voice across. Nicola gave us a couple of questions to help frame our thinking, and I liked the first one, which was what is it and what does it mean for patients? Because I think we all assume everybody's talking about AAR, but why would they unless they're sat in a workshop discussing it? But I think for us, I think it's a good opportunity to reflect, why are we doing this? And again, I appreciated the minister's comments because it's about, I think from my perspective and for our members, this is an opportunity for the UK to reframe its position on innovation in healthcare, including medicines. So is this country interested in being a leader, a fast follower, or a wait-and-see society? Where do we want to be? Because the world around us is also having these same conversations, the same questions around innovation. You can hear anywhere in Europe, in the US, in China, wherever. I've recently joined ABPI from a global role at one of our member companies. And certainly the question then is, if you're going to do that, will it be across all areas? Are you going to specialize? Will the UK look to be a specialist in certain areas? Because all of those will have implications not just for my members, but critically for yours. Where do we want to be leading? And in that case, if we want to use the AR then as a way to move forward, that's why we're paying so much attention to it, because we think there are signals coming from this very review which will tell us where the mind is of the government and all the stakeholders as to where they want to be on that trajectory. So the findings to date, and I won't presume you've read the report, maybe many of you have. I would recommend it. It's a good read. It's not a long read. I've written longer and less interesting things myself, so congratulations to Sir Hugh on that one. And I also think that the summary we've had today gives us a good background. So for us as industry, we think there are very positive proposals in there, but obviously the key point is getting to that next level of detail. And that's where our mind is now. And in particular, we want to understand not just what the detail of the proposal is, but what happens to other things. So we know that when you introduce any change, other things change with it. So what things have we not thought about that might get a knock-on? So the example of the early access or accelerated pathway has a real opportunity to be a very paradigm-changing way of looking at development and bringing forward earlier access for patients. Now that's terrific, but we're talking in that case about 4 or 5 medicines. Last year at the FDA, we had 41 new molecular entities filed. 17 of those were first in class. So which of those get to be one of the 4 or the 5? And more importantly, what happens to the rest? And I think some of the questions around the 5 propositions is understanding we've got to clarify the broader piece, because it'll be about priorities, but also about understanding that it's never going to be just a few. It's about understanding the broader program of innovation across the board. And I think that's something that is, I think it's well understood by the team, so I'm not telling them something for the first time, but it's something that we do need to get into an understanding of how is that going to filter through as a process? Because that's what matters for my members, and I'm sure yours. It also is happening in a world of changing environments. So we have the European Prime designation, which is going to allow, again, an accelerated filing approach, which is going to be in place by February. So to what extent is that going to line up with the same criteria that we're discussing here? Because the better we can do that, the more we can influence how the European criteria are, the better it's going to be for British patients. It'll happen here much more quickly. So we need to make sure not to lose an opportunity to help shape not just what happens in the UK, but look across Europe. And I think given the critical role of the MHRA in that process, to now we're in a good place to go. There are some conversations, as have been mentioned, around flexible pricing. Obviously, we have the PPRS, and that's taken in the context. But what's not been in the report is NICE and the methods and progress on how NICE is going to move forward. Now, to me, that's the pothole in the runway. If we don't get that part lined up, I'm not sure how the rest of it's going to work as smoothly. So there's a few things that we're going to be bringing back to the AR team. And obviously, the questions around adoption of innovation and the role of the NHS is critical. And we've got a great opportunity in that there's a fund that's been proposed for system redesign. I think it's incredible. But again, Halima's comments this morning really brought it back to me, which is we've got to have not just a change in the NHS, it's a change in the wider population and in patients to really affect this process. So I think we've got to think the AAR, but the AAR within the context of everything else. And so I'll just finish with the last thing, which is the part of it. I represented ABPI, all the work we do on research, medical, and innovation policy. Research is deep in my soul. And the thing that the AAR doesn't really deal with is discovery and early stages. So that's the interesting bit, because to my mind, it's all of a piece. Saying that, very happy to see the CSR at least give us a hint of a positive outcome for British science and the opportunity to hold the line, because we know our industry funds $4.1 billion here in R&D. But will that continue? It depends on how public defense investment works with it. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Eric Lowe. I'm Chief Executive and Founder of Myeloma UK. It's a pleasure to be here, so thank you for the invite. I've seen the yellow and red cards come up there, so I'm going to be very brief so we can leave time for discussion. So from a patient organization standpoint, whether big, small, new, old, and from a patient perspective, I think the AAR consultation was very welcome, because I think we've been really frustrated for decades about the very obvious disconnects and silos in the system. And I think the recognition that that was acceptable, actually, and that we didn't really understand that everything was interconnected. And it's been hugely frustrating. And I think as a consequence to that, alongside the many amazing things that happen on the NHS, at least for cancer patients, it hasn't really worked out. It's almost like we've snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. We haven't quite been able to deliver for patients, because I don't think we've really understood what we were doing, what the issues were, what the problems were. And I think as a consequence of that, we've had a range of what I would call stick and plaster policies that could actually have, in retrospect, be more harmful than helpful. And I think that we've lost, actually, a decade or more of really putting in place sensible, coherent, future-proofed, patient-centric, NHS-facing policies that helps us address that very obvious tension between demand-driven healthcare from society, from patients and doctors, the willingness or unwillingness of payers to pay, and suppliers who want to make a return on investment, and that's perfectly acceptable. And I think, not to be too negative, as a nation, we've systematically failed to address that tension. And I think George and his vision gives us the best opportunity to try and do that. And I think so it's been a very welcome development. That said, it's not going to be an easy task, because the stakeholders, the alignment, the drivers, the rewards, the incentives are huge and complex. And it's a real challenge to try and get that alignment from patients to discovery and back again. So it's a real challenge that George has taken on. But the rationale is very good and very sound. And I think when you think about that in the context of the report, as Jenny has said, Sir Hugh's done an amazing job trying to condense all of that into a fairly high-level, short report across 5 core work streams. And that's a good thing, but it also makes us all very, very nervous because we all realize the complexity that sits underneath it. And I think the real challenge from now, as a lot of the panel and Hugh himself has alluded to, is we've got to drill down now to 2 or 3 levels of detail. Otherwise, it won't benefit patients. It'll just be another effort to fix things that gathers dust on the shelf. And our hope is that this one's going to be different. This is the one consultation that's going to deliver for patients, but that task is very, very, very difficult because of the complexity. So the challenge that the AAR team have between now and April is actually to come out with a document at the end that has some recommendations that are believable. Because if it's not, no one's going to buy into it. They have to be implementable. If we set out to boil the ocean in the AAR, it will not work, it will fail. And it's really easy to write documents with 57,000 recommendations, but that's not what we're trying to do. What we need here is a really simple and coherent roadmap. And then we need an implementation plan, because unless we give that report the infrastructure, the support to implement it, it won't work. And I'm not exactly clear how that's going to happen, because Sir Hugh and George listed about 27 acronyms of different organizations who currently have responsibility for innovation, adoption, diffusion, paying, approval. It's going to be an almighty task. So the critical success factors for me, it's got to be simple enough that it's implementable, but not so simple that it carries no weight. We cannot boil the ocean. We need to think strategically about the pots we need to boil, short-term and long-term. It needs to be future-proofed. Because I've always been concerned that the policies that we have today are to fix the problems of the last decade, not the problems that we'll see in the next decade or 2 decades. And that's what it has to do. And there's already concerns that we have with government, because if you think about devolution of healthcare, devolving, so there might be 15 lit runways in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. It may be okay for the AAR to say, this is the way we do it, and this is the pricing mechanisms. And devolving might say, well, I'm not interested in any of that. Our responsibility is to spend our $6 billion in a way that we think is appropriate for our local health and social care constituents. So I think that on one side, the theory and the rationale behind this is really wonderful, and you can see how patients will benefit. But on the flip side, it's hugely complex, and we need to make sure we get it right between now and April. Because my sense is if we fail this time round to put a coherent bench-to-bedside system in place that's patient-centric and delivers for patients, I don't know where we go from there. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for those really insightful comments. I'm going to throw it open to all of you to ask questions, but while you're just thinking about your questions and getting them ready, I'm going to turn to Sir Hugh and ask him if he wants to comment on any of those comments, and particularly the question that Eric posed about how we can make this one different. How do you make sure it's believable?
Well, we'll try, I think is the short answer. I mean, I suppose if I bring anything to the review, it's certainly not the depth of my scientific knowledge. It's that I've knocked around government quite a long time, and I've seen quite a lot of these reports, and you're quite right. It is easy to produce a report which shouts at people, and then nothing very much happens, really. So I think this is a matter of alignment, actually, and getting it right. The one point I would just say about this is that if we look to solve every problem at national level, it won't work. So I'm not saying Devo Mank is the answer or any of the other things, but I do think sometimes there's an inclination to try and work out some pathway at national level through which you can press everything. It won't work. So apart from anything else, I think as a model for innovation, it would be difficult to imagine a worse model. So I do think we need much more vibrant, lively local systems for encouraging innovation, and in particular where patients can make their voices heard, and so that it's not just a national thing. But then you have to be very clear about what has to be done at national level and make that as slick and as smart and as quick as possible. So those will be the models inside our heads. All I would say is that I think the stars are well aligned for this. I think there's a lot of commitment amongst the senior national bodies to try and improve the system. And I think if the conversation with the NHS is held in the right way, then I think there's lots of excitement in the NHS about this agenda as well. But if it's just added to become the 93rd target of the year, you know, then it will again die a death. So I don't think it's insuperable, but I don't underestimate the challenge.
Thank you. Questions? We've got one here, and then can we have another microphone up there? We'll take two questions together and then give the panel an opportunity to talk.
Yeah, Kieran Brain, Tumor Research. I was interested in the point about NICE, or NICE not being included in the actual report. One of the things I'm involved in is advanced therapies within the EMA. One of the things we get very frustrated about is the fact that regulators approve drugs, but they never actually get through the likes of NICE. And one that came out 2 or 3 years ago is actually being reimbursed in 1 out of the 28 EU countries. And one of the reasons that we heard about NICE was that, well, there is sort of, you know, symptomatic care. This is the cure, but we're not interested because symptomatic care is cheaper. And I was just wondering if the panel might like to comment on this variation between the regulators and then actually getting the drug reimbursed.
Hold your thoughts on that one while we just take one more question from the top.
Liam O'Toole, I'm Chief Executive of Arthritis Research UK. Now, musculoskeletal disease affects 10 million people in the UK, and one of the issues that exercises us is that if NICE recommends the use of a drug, there's an obligation on the NHS to pay for it, but that's not the case for non-drug interventions. And whilst pharmaceuticals are really important for people with inflammatory arthritis, for people with osteoarthritis and back pain, which is the largest part of the burden, often it's things like exercise, physiotherapy, and there isn't another treatment, first-line treatment. So really a question for Sir Hugh to sort of reassure us that the review will also look at non-pharmacological interventions rather than just drugs, important as access to new drugs is.
Well, certainly I can give you the assurance on the second point, and one of the things we're explicitly looking at is the scope for widening NICE's remit in relation to other technologies. We just need to keep in mind the point that I've just made, that if NICE were to review every single new technology that's coming forward, I think they're already beginning to start to look at digital products. They'd spend, you know, they'd just be overwhelmed, I think. So we need to be selective about that, but absolutely accept the case for broadening things out. And I do think one of the, just to come to your point, although I'm not a great expert on this, one of the things that we will be definitely is in our remit is the basis, if you like, for NICE recommendations.
Comments from others?
Yeah, from my point of view, I think NICE should be central to any new system. I think HTA generally sits sort of equidistant and from bench to bedside, and I think can look down the way to suppliers and up the way to payers and actually try and better connect the challenges and issues and opportunities with both. So things like NICE Scientific Advice and Office of Market Access, I think, are really important tools that we have, world-class tools. They can make a huge difference. I think we need to better connect NICE and NHS England in terms of adoption, diffusion, and commissioning. But I think the key thing about the question, why does NICE say no? It's because most often drug companies do studies to get a license. So they do that to prove safety and efficacy. And for the last number of decades, their final customer, for the most part, has been the FDA or EMA. But with the advent of HTA, that's a subsequent downstream customer, and their data requirements are very different from safety and efficacy to get a license. So I think what we need to do is to improve inputs and work together and collaboratively with industry to do more sophisticated, broader evidence development that balances out the needs for global data and local data that HTA bodies in the UK and payers need to make good decisions about the allocation of scarce resources in the UK.
Can I just add into that as well? So I'm going to combine both questions. I think what's at the core of it is really going to Eric's earlier point about future-proofing, especially thinking about advanced therapies. One of the challenges is that, you know, the NICE focus has been around a particular category of medicine, a type of medicine for which, as you say, the traditional piece was around regulatory evidence. Now there's a lot of evidence produced for HTA. Is that the same sort of analysis and data that you would use to evaluate a med tech or a service? No. Is it the same sort of evidence that you would probably need for an advanced therapy? Again, probably no. You're going to have to look at different things because they are different types of intervention in patient care. And I think that breadth of NICE's work does need enhancing. I think the Office for Market Access is going to be a key part to that, but there's no doubt about it. One of the biggest rate limiters for NICE right now is resource. You know, they are over programmed at the minute, and I don't know how we're going to fit all the things that we want to do into that one little tiny box. So I hope the AAR is thinking about how do you help NICE to address this broader program of work, which they need to do, help them to have those different approaches that they want to take and encourage that, but have it properly resourced in a way that it's going to be able to deliver. Because right now it seems like there's lots more going on there in tray and almost nothing coming out of the out tray.
So if I could perhaps respond to the comment about NICE and how we get the right kind of data as well. I think that's why we see the innovation partnership and also the innovation exchanges that Hugh has talked about in the report as being absolutely pivotal to getting the right, asking the right questions very early on, and then including the NHS in the innovation partnerships such that they recognise what is coming and can plan for it appropriately. So I slightly disagree with what Ginny said, that NICE isn't considered. It may not be mentioned, but it certainly is considered. And I think we recognise that NICE plays an absolutely pivotal role. The other thing, just to pick up, I think, on Eric's point about healthcare devolution, I think in terms of how innovation exchanges might work, that actually is not only a threat, but I think it's also an opportunity in terms of how we can do different kinds of evaluation, perhaps in terms of earlier evaluation, perhaps even pre-licensing, and that's one of the things that we're thinking about. So collecting the right evidence may actually help in that adoption as well.
Could I just, I'm going to be a bit cheeky to button, sorry, but one of the things that's really important is that, and I'm not sure the extent to which it's covered in the interim report, is we're always talking about innovation that comes from companies, industry, but on behalf of NIHR and all the members in the room that spend whatever £2 billion a year, there needs to be a lit runway for academic research data. And right now, if I look at colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, myeloma, algorithms on the NHS, there is no evidence whatsoever of the adoption and diffusion of data that comes from academic clinical studies. It's all hugely biased towards the adoption and diffusion of results that come from phase 3 studies. So for us, to go back to our donors and our patients, we have to demonstrate impact. We want to tell them that our clinical research is benefiting patients, and right now there is no lit runway, in fact there's no runway at all, never mind having lights on it, to the adoption and diffusion of academic research into practice. And we're missing a massive trick. So George is right, the NIHR is amazing, but actually it can't really turn around and say it's transformed patients yet, because we just don't have these systems. And so we need to see that in the review as well, that actually our data, the best scenario is collaboration with industry to integrate academic and commercial research to benefit patients on the NHS.
If I can just make one comment on that. We have the Francis Crick Institute, and that issue is realised and being addressed, I think, by academic health science networks and various other networks, and particularly at the Crick, where I was on the board, we were looking at translating and cooperating with academia and translating that research into reality. I'd just like to pick up on one of the other points that someone said about physiotherapy and things. I think we still need to remember that it's the individual patient at the end of the line that matters. So it's actually the care plan for that patient and the choice of that patient whether to have one of the drugs or not, because actually some drugs have side effects or might not suit their life. So we've always got to remember that it is an individual care plan for that patient at the end of the line that is important, and how to get that information to the patient to be able to make a reasonable choice, an informed choice, is one of the important things.
We've got time for one more set of questions. There was one here from Leslie. Any other questions?
Thank you very much. There seem to be quite a few hurdles that we have to jump over before we get to the nirvana at the end. The NICE issue, I think, is one that is at the top end, with NICE apparently only able to look at 3 applications a year, if I've got that right, and the rest have to go through a complex process in NHS England for review, and that process is very sluggish indeed at the moment, and it seems that NICE itself is probably nowhere near resourced well enough to be able to deal with the volume it's likely to be faced with fairly soon. At the other end of the spectrum is the delivery and the willingness of CCGs to take up anything that is approved centrally. And they may be mandated to do so, but they may be very sluggish in the way they do it. I wondered how you were tackling these issues.
Any final questions to add to the panel? Last one up here.
Matthew Hobbs from Prostate Cancer UK. I don't want to labour the point about NICE, but so we've heard that NICE isn't explicitly looked at in the review. Is that deliberate? And is it too late to change that? Because it sounds like that's going to be a big pothole that anything is going to hit.
Final question? You can fit one more in if it's non-NICE. It can still be a nice question, but not about NICE. No, that's it. Over to the panel, and if you give final comments at the same time.
Well, just to say that NICE is completely covered by the review and has been deeply engaged in the review, and I have to say, been amongst the most creative contributors to the review. So I think you can be reassured that they are engaged at all stages. I think one of the key points I just want to get across here is that at the moment, although this is a caricature, the difficulty with the system, as we see it as the review team, is that it's reactive rather than proactive. That products lurch up towards this system and then sometimes crash up against it. And what we want to do is to turn that round so that the system collectively is thinking at the earliest possible moment about how it is going to tackle emerging products, certainly the ones that look the most promising, and that's a difficult matter of definition, which we'll certainly be exploring, and getting its act together so that we get into discussions at the earliest possible stage with a company or other innovator, whether it's a university or wherever it is actually, so that, if you like, bespoke packages are worked out, that data requirements are thought through at the earliest possible stage, and we talk about reimbursement and flexible systems of reimbursement to be associated with conditional licensing. So the whole aim is to shift the thing forward, rather than at the as I think fear happens at the moment, is that it's all treated serially. And I don't think we are at all thinking that the number of products that we would put through this new managed system with commercial access agreements and so on, as set out in the report, should be limited to 3 or 4. I think that's a matter that we'll look at, but I would expect to see a significantly bigger number than that of products on the accelerated pathway at any one time. We'll certainly have to think through the resourcing implications of that, and that is one of the things I think which we'll need to talk about within governments. On the other end, point that Professor Turnberg made was about the CCGs. As I said, I think there's a real commitment on the part of NHS England to dig into this a little bit more. There is a perception out there that commissioners are sometimes slow to take up even nice mandatory recommendations or second guess them. And Keith Ridge, the chief pharmacist, is working with us on really looking at how we can turn some of that around. And we need better data to look at prescribing practice right across the board within hospitals as well as at local level. And that's where I think, again, having stronger regional exchanges where patients can interrogate data relating to prescribing both in primary care and secondary care will also be helpful.
Very brief responses from the rest of the panel in the last couple of minutes.
Yes, thank you again for all the comments to date. And I think there's, as Hugh says, there's a great opportunity for patients' organisations to get involved here. And particularly from the discussion we've had today, I take home the patient outcomes and the societal and economic benefits that we need to articulate better. Thank you.
So just very finally, I think to the last question around the engaging all of the stakeholders, particularly CCGs and the NHS, recognising the need to be involved earlier. They need to have better visibility from improved horizon scanning. And I recognise that in the delivering change proposition, there is a culture change, and that change has to come through people, both through incentives and culture. And you can deliver change both through hearts and minds, but also by establishing a burning platform. I hope people recognise there's a burning platform, but we need to bring people with us to make this work.
I'm happy to be one of those people that helps along the way, but I think that's the key point from, I'll steal again from Eric's presentation because you were good. So you, as you always are. But the comment that, if this is going to have any impact, it's got to be believable. And to that extent, it has to then address the things that people know are a problem. So if we know that there are challenges and aspects of the system like NICE or whatever, it's good that, it's terrific. I've been working very closely with NICE in the process as well, but these issues have to line up. Now, not everything has to be done within AAR, that's certainly true, but we need to understand how parallel developments or other developments are going to happen to help support the general process. Otherwise, is it going to be believable? We'd like to see it have an impact. So that's where we're going to be providing feedback. We encourage all of you to get as engaged as you can and give the feedback. I think there's an online survey now, or if you're like me, you just pester Stuart directly. But I think it's time to get really engaged because this is not going to happen just because 5 people sit down in a room for 3 hours. This has to have us all involved.
Yeah, so I think for me, the AAR is the best opportunity we've had, actually, in a generation to make a better future for all stakeholders, but particularly patients. And therefore, it's very, very exciting. And I think just because NICE has been mentioned a lot, I think one of the most pleasing things for me in all the discussions is this recognition, actually, that NICE isn't actually the block and the pothole that we all thought it, or most of us thought it was. And actually, their role, I think, should be enhanced. It should be resourced. It won't do everything. We've had issues with NICE in the past. They know that. And they're desperate to be different. They're desperate to be creative. The problem is, and this is for George, they haven't been given the remit to be able to be even more creative. And I think we should get behind NICE as one of the key change agents in this whole process to work with them, give them the remit that they want, they deserve, and they can be, I think, phenomenal enablers in this whole system.
Thank you all very much. I hope that's given Sir Hugh a lot to think about, certainly a ringing endorsement for a believable report. We will make sure the website is put onto Twitter after this so that you all can continue to feed into the conversation with the review team over the coming weeks and months. But in the meantime, thank you very much to the panel.